The family's house was demolished and we got 10 new apartments. But my parents gave them all to my younger sister. However, when my father was hospitalized, they asked me to pay the medical expenses. Just as I was about to refute, my mother slapped me in the face. "You ungrateful wretch. We've raised you for so long. What's wrong with asking you to pay some medical expenses?" Mother scolded me, pointing at my nose. "Sister, actually Dad loves you the most. You can't abandon Dad," my sister said while crying pitifully. After all, I couldn't abandon my father. In order to raise the medical expenses, I sold the house that I had worked so hard for, worked like crazy, and took part-time jobs delivering takeaways after work. But I was killed by a drunk driver on my way to deliver takeaways. Fortunately, I managed to raise enough money for my father's medical expenses before I died. My soul floated in the air, waiting for my parents to hold the drunk driving driver accountable. But I saw the driver throw 1 million yuan at my parents, and they left with a big smile. As for my body, my parents also donated it to the hospital and got 1 million yuan in compensation. The whole family wasn't sad because of my death. Instead, they happily went to the Maldives for a trip. That was the place I had always wanted to go but never made it in my lifetime. Then I was reborn, and went back to the day before my father was hospitalized. This is 1 million yuan from the demolition compensation at home, and the property ownership certificates. All the property ownership certificates have your name on them, Mother said as she placed the bank card and 10 bright red property ownership certificates in front of my sister. Looking extremely happy. "Your father and I are old and don't need them. They're all for you. Mom, I love you." My sister kissed Mother's cheek again and again while holding the bank card and the property ownership certificates. My hand holding the chopsticks paused, and I felt very uncomfortable. We are both daughters of our parents. Why do they only love my sister? Seeming to notice that I was unhappy, my sister looked at me cautiously and pushed the property ownership certificates and the bank card in front of me. "Sister, don't be angry. I don't want them. They're all for you." After saying that, she lowered her head as if she was very afraid of me. Before I could say anything, my mother slapped me in the face. "Nina, don't you have any shame? Do you always have to compete with your sister for everything?" She grabbed the bank card and the property ownership certificates and stuffed them into my sister's arms. "Cherry, take them. This is for Mom and Dad for you. Your sister can't take a single cent away." After that, she glared at me fiercely and dragged my sister into the room. My sister turned to look at me, and was still persuading Mother. "Mom, sister is also your daughter. Let me share them with her. Don't give her any. She doesn't deserve it." Mother didn't even look at me. I covered my swollen red cheek and froze on the spot. Looking at this familiar scene in front of me, I knew that I was reborn. The house we are living in now was bought with the money I had saved through hard work. Because of the house demolition at home, there was no place to live. In order to improve the lives of my parents and sister, I worked myself to the bone and bought this house and brought them to the city. Although it was a bit small, it was finally a warm home. I had given so much to this family. Why couldn't they return a little love to me? Moreover, soon my father would be accidentally hospitalized, and my sister would morally blackmail me for money and force me to sell my house. "Dad." I turned to look at my father. My father just looked at me guiltily for a moment, then pretended not to hear me, and continued watching TV. Soon, the sound of snoring came. The next day, I became the unfilial daughter known to everyone in the community. Because I competed with my sister for the demolition compensation and with my parents for the house. As soon as I walked out of the house to go to work, I could feel the strange looks from the neighbors and their pointing fingers behind my back. I knew this was Mother's masterpiece from last night. Since she came to the community, she always dragged people of her age to pour out her grievances to them every now and then, telling them how unfilial I was. Thinking of the fact that she gave me life, I didn't argue with her, but I didn't expect that even more disgusting things were still to come. Soon after I arrived at the company, My mother called me. It's bad. Nina, your father is hospitalized. Come here quickly. Hearing my mother's anxious crying, I didn't think twice and immediately went to the hospital. I saw my father covered in blood being pushed into the operating room. The doctor said that the patient was in critical condition and needed immediate surgery, and asked the family members to pay the medical expenses. As soon as my mother heard that it was 500 yuan, she immediately turned to look at me. Your father is on the verge of death. Go and pay it. I only have such a small salary. Besides her paying the mortgage and providing for your food and drink, where do I have any savings? Before I could finish my words, my mother raised her hand and slapped me. Nina, you ungrateful wretch. Your father and I raised you with great difficulty. What's wrong with asking you to pay some medical expenses? You heartless thing. Are you going to watch your father die? My mother cried bitterly, accusing me of being unfilial. My sister also had red-rimmed eyes and cried pitifully. Sister, actually Dad loves you the most. He was worried that you wouldn't eat well at noon, so he went to the company to bring you lunch on purpose, and that's how he got into the accident. You can't be heartless and abandon Ad. I looked at the lunchbox that was half crushed beside me, and what was exposed was half a chicken leg left from yesterday. It was a hen they bought specially to make soup for Cherry to nourish her body. It was just that there was some left over and it had gone a bit off. Worried that my sister would get sick from eating it, they thought it was a waste to throw it away, so they wanted to send it to me to eat. It was the same when I was a child. When the family conditions were not good, all the good things were given to my sister first. My sister ate eggs while I could only chew on hard buns. My sister drank milk while I could only drink cold water. My sister wore new clothes while I could only pick up the shabby clothes that my sister didn't want. My sister was raised by my mother like a little girl in the city, while I was like a beggar without a mother. People in the village all laughed at me, saying that I was a child my mother picked up, but I knew that I was my mother's biological daughter. And my sister was just my cousin that my uncle didn't want and fostered in my family. My cousin is the same age as me. I remember it was a winter. That year, she was 8 years old. My uncle was jailed for injuring someone while gambling. My aunt abandoned her and ran away, so she was sent to my home to be fostered. And she has lived here for more than 10 years. There were 3 people in my family. Originally, there were 2 bedrooms and 1 main room. I had 1 bedroom, and my parents had one. After my cousin came, my mother cleared out the couch. At first, I thought she wanted my cousin to live in it. To my surprise, it was me who had to live in it. I was extremely reluctant. She looked at me extremely disappointed. Nina, how can you be so selfish? Your cousin is so pitiful. Can't you give in to her? The cow had been sold, but the couch still stank horribly, especially in winter. The wind blew in from all directions. Starting from that winter, I slept on the bed in the couch. The cold wind pierced my body through the gaps from all directions. I clutched the hard quilt, huddled in the corner, and wiped my tears silently. In the middle of the night, I couldn't bear it any longer and begged my mother to give me a thick quilt. She said, "Do you think money grows on trees? Just bear with the cold, and it will pass. Nina, can't you think of me and stop causing me trouble?" Seeing her hysterical look, I didn't dare to speak again. But not long after, I saw that my cousin had a brand new pink bedsheet and a soft silk quilt. And because I was often frozen, and had a long-lasting cough that didn't get better, I finally got chronic bronchitis. Every time it gets cold, I cough so hard as if my lungs would come out. In the 3rd year of junior high school, my cousin and I took the high school entrance examination together. I was admitted to one middle school in the county. My cousin's grades were not good and she could only go to the high school in the town. My mother was stunned at first, and finally asked me how much it would cost to go to school in the county. I said that if I was frugal, 300 yuan a month would be enough. My mother exploded immediately. "Nina, how could I have given birth to such a spendthrift like you? 300 yuan a month? How dare you ask for it? She chased me with a rolling pin. Do you know that your father and I work from dawn to dusk, call year round, and can't save 3,000 yuan? All the money is used to support your study. Do you want us to starve? You are really not as sensible as your sister. With such good grades. She deliberately did poorly in the exam and stayed in the town to go to high school to keep us company. That day, I was chased by my mother with a rolling pin and ran 3 laps around the village. My body was bruised all over. My sister cried and persuaded, Auntie, let my sister go to high school in the county. Anyway, I study in the countryside. It doesn't cost much. And I can also help you with the farm work. My mother was even angrier. She beat me half to death and finally made me stay in the township to go to school with my cousin. Later, I asked my cousin, don't you know your own grades? You copied my homework. You copied my exams. When you couldn't copy in the high school entrance examination. That little score was your real grade. Why didn't you tell my mother the truth? After all, she was young. She lowered her head and didn't dare to speak. Under my interrogation, she fled in a hurry. Later, I learned that because of her pure grades, my cousin wanted to be an art student in high school and she wanted to learn painting. The family conditions were not good and could only afford to support one. My mother gave up on me. My mother spent a large amount of money on her and found a very good art teacher to tutor her one-on-one. Every weekend, she would take my cousin to the county town to have classes. Even during the Senior 3 training, she simply rented a house in the city with my cousin. At that time, my math grades were not so good and I wanted to have some tutoring. After thinking for a long time, I finally summoned up the courage to ask her. She immediately scolded me, Nina. This is how you are in your life. Why do you still need tutoring? 1,500 yuan a semester. Do you want to drive your father and me to death? I knew she wouldn't pay for my tutoring. I shouldn't have asked. But my cousin's 1-month training fee was 3,000 yuan. My mother took my cousin to the county town. My cousin was dressed very prettily. Before leaving, she also hugged me. She said, Sister, don't blame Auntie. I can't learn this course by myself. Otherwise I would study by myself. Don't worry. The teacher praised me for being talented. When I am admitted to the Central Academy of Fine Arts, I will buy you a sports car and buy a villa for Auntie and Uncle. She smiled very sweetly. Like an angel. Mom and Dad were very happy to be coaxed by her. Before leaving, my mother told me, your father's health is not good. Since I'm not at home, you should share more of the farm work. What she said was true. Until my cousin's art examination was over, she didn't come back and stayed in the city with my cousin all the time. Soon I was about to take the college entrance examination, and the wheat in the fields was ripe. But suddenly it rained heavily. Seeing that the hard work of half a year was about to be ruined, I harvested the wheat in the rain. As for my father, he went to the city to send native eggs to my sister just because my sister called and said she wanted to eat native eggs from our hometown. Finally, I got sick. With a high fever, I held on and went to the examination room to take the exam. Because I knew that if I stayed in this horrible family any longer, I would go crazy. The college entrance examination was my only way out. Later, I was admitted to a Chi University. My cousin's cultural courses were so poor that she only got into an unranked undergraduate school. When I took the admission notice and told them this good news, my mother beat me up again. Nina, are you still conscienceless? Your sister didn't do well in the exam because she was worried about your father's health and could only go to an ordinary undergraduate school. But you showed off in front of her by getting into a key university. Also in that year, my uncle died in prison because he fought with someone in prison. My mother then transferred my cousin's household registration to my home and changed her surname to be the same as mine. She also changed her way of addressing and called my aunt and uncle father and mother. Since then, they have become a family of 3, and I have become the redundant one. Still dare to glare at me. My mother rushed in front of me and roared, grabbing my hair with one hand, your father is about to die. It's only natural for me to ask you to take out the money. What do you have to be dissatisfied about? Because she had been doing manual labor for years and was very strong. I felt that my scalp was about to be torn off by her, remembering that in my previous life, I was also morally blackmailed by her like this. In the end, I sold my house and worked as a food delivery person to treat my father's illness. However, just as I had collected enough medical expenses, I was killed by a drunk driver. After my death, they received a large sum of compensation. They took my compensation money and the money from selling my organs to travel and have a good time in the Maldives. An unprecedented anger burst out in my heart. I forcefully pried open my mother's hand that was grabbing my hair and kicked her hard in the lower abdomen. My mother fell to the corner. My cousin hurriedly went to help her. "Mom, how are you? Are you all right?" Then she turned to look at me and complained. "Sister, how could you hit Mom? She is our mother. How could you hit her?" My cousin angrily rebuked me. Her voice harsh. Her voice was so loud that it attracted a lot of people. Seeing that more and more people were gathering around to watch, my mother deliberately publicized my unfilial crimes in public. For a while, all the onlookers pointed at me and criticized, "This kind of daughter is raised in vain. Her father is dying in the hospital, but she doesn't want to take out the money. An ungrateful wretch. Hey, you don't know that this self-centered daughter was spoiled by her parents since she was a child. It's just pitiful that the parents' hearts were so kind, giving her the best. But in the end, they ended up like this. Mom is such a pitiful person, having given birth to an unfilial daughter. Yes, look at how filial the younger sister is. Her eyes are all swollen from crying. I know this girl. She lives in the same community as me. Her mother said yesterday that she robbed her younger sister of the demolition compensation and the house. Oh, all the money is in her hands, but she doesn't want to pay for her father's medical expenses. Conscienceless. Really conscienceless. How could there be such a bad person in the world? I feel unlucky just living in the same community as her. Everyone was spitting with rage, regarding me as an extremely evil person. My mother looked at me while crying, with sarcasm and provocation in her eyes. "Nina, would you rather hit me than take out the money?" I closed my eyes for a moment. I didn't expect that my mother really had a way to deal with me. She thought she had grasped my vital point and wanted to use public opinion to force me to take out the money. I wiped away my tears and sneered with disdain. "Is this all you've got? There are so few people here. My sister is a big-time internet celebrity. Let her find some internet celebrity bloggers to do a live stream all over the internet. Only in this way can I become infamous and be forced to take out the money to save my father." My mother's face darkened, and she gritted her teeth and said, "Nina, you are forcing me to do this." Then she grabbed my cousin's hand. "Cherry, satisfy her. Mom, this is not very good. Sister is not married yet. It's too cruel to her." My mother sneered. She asked for it herself. "It's not our fault." The onlookers also chimed in. "Cruel? This unfaithful and unfilial girl should be well known to everyone, so as to prevent any family from being unclear-sighted and marrying a disaster. Yes, little sister, don't plead for your sister anymore. You are doing a good deed." But my cousin was still hesitating. My mother snatched her mobile phone and made several calls. Looking at them, I was actually a little expectant in my heart. Make a fuss. The bigger the fuss, the better. It's best to let the whole world see your true faces clearly. 7 Cherry's influence was quite good. Before long, a bunch of internet celebrity anchors came. They pointed their mobile phones at my face and started the live stream. "Folks, today we got a huge piece of news. It's this woman. Don't be deceived by her innocent-looking face. In fact, she is a horrible person. She has been stealing her sister's things since she was a child, not showing any consideration for her parents' hardships at all, only thinking about herself, being self-centered. Her family was extremely poor. but she forced her father to work on the construction site tying steel bars. In the midsummer, her father worked hard under the scorching sun of over 30 degrees Celsius. And the money he earned in a day was not enough for her to buy a handbag. She also forced her father to sell blood to buy a house for her. Now that her father is unexpectedly hospitalized, she doesn't want to take out a single cent to save him. A devil. Simply a devil. The anchors vividly added some unfounded charges to me. Fabricating lies and exaggerating. Oh, no. It's not fabricating lies. Nor exaggerating. What they said were all facts. But the person involved was not me. It should be Cherry. All these things were done by Cherry. For a while, all the major live stream rooms were filled with curses against me and sympathy for Cherry. Damn. This family's parents are so pitiful. How could they have such a shameless daughter? It's really disgusting. How could there be such a person in the world? She doesn't deserve to live. It's better if she's dead. I know her. She is the sister of our big anchor Cherry. Oh my God. Baby Cherry is so pitiful. Having such a sister. She always said that her sister was nice. Cherry is so kind. If I had such a sister, I would be furious. Feel sorry for Cherry for 3 seconds. Netizens were very fast. My photos soon became a hot search topic. Even the video of me resisting my mother in the hospital just now was only cut to the part where I pushed my mother down. With the caption, "The unfilial daughter not only refuses to pay for her father's treatment but also hits her old mother." Labels such as unfilial daughter, evil girl, and selfish ghost were attached to me and became synonyms for my identity. Some bloggers, in pursuit of traffic, spread the news without verification and added fuel to the fire. All of a sudden, I became the target of public criticism. Some netizens dug out my address through human flesh search and began to come to my door to throw rotten eggs and pour fecal water. I was like a criminal waiting to be executed, standing in a pile of garbage and being bullied to the fullest. My sister cried while protecting me. Don't blame my sister. She was just spoiled by our parents since she was a child. She knows she was wrong. Please. Don't blame her. She held me tightly and used her body to block the rotten eggs thrown at me, getting her head all dirty. My mother pulled her painfully. Cherry. Stop speaking well of her. She doesn't deserve your protection. Her fans also persuaded. Cherry. You are just too kind. But a sister like her doesn't deserve your treatment. Move aside quickly. Let us teach her a good lesson on behalf of your parents. My mother asked me with red eyes. At this time, are you still unwilling to take out money to treat your father? The doctor just called and said that if you don't pay the money, your father will be discharged from the hospital. Are you just going to watch him die? I looked at my mother and Cherry. I really have no money. Don't you all know that? If you have no money, you can sell the house. Cherry blurted out almost immediately. Yes. Sell your house. My mother forced me to sell the house again. But clearly Cherry had $1 million on deposit in 10 properties. Yet they were only coveting the little that I had worked so hard for. I won't sell it, I said through gritted teeth. Another round of abuse sounded around, and from the screen. At this time, a familiar figure suddenly walked towards me from the crowded crowd. Looking at that familiar face, a tinge of sadness welled up in my heart. Ryan, my boyfriend since college, was handsome and sunny, and came from a wealthy family. He came to my city for me. He had always been my strong support. He loved me and trusted me. No matter what grievances I suffered, he would gently stroke my hair and softly coax me, telling me that he was there, and that I should not be afraid. I also trusted him and regarded him as my only haven. Every time I needed him, he would appear. Seeing him, I let down all my defenses and turned myself into his arms regardless of everything. But as soon as I touched him, he pushed me away mercilessly. Caught off guard, I lost my balance and fell to the ground. The broken bottle shards all over the ground under my knees and palms stabbed painfully into my flesh, making my whole body twitch in pain. But it was not as painful as the pain in my heart. Ryan, don't you trust me either? I looked at him with trembling lips. Nina, I really didn't expect you to be such a person. Ryan's eyes were red. And his eyes were full of disappointment. Do you know how much effort I have made to be with you? I always thought you were a sensible, cute, and kind-hearted girl. I didn't expect you to be so selfish and vicious. You are so disgusting. How can I marry you? Ryan, who had always been a gentleman and gentle, lost his control for the first time. He was hoarse and his tone was full of disappointment in me. Seeing him like this, I felt very sad and endured the pain to stand up and explain to him. Ryan, stop talking. You don't deserve to enter my family. Ryan shook me off violently, took out an exquisite ring from his pocket and threw it at my face. We were going to get engaged tomorrow. But you occupied the hot search on all major websites in this way. You have completely disgraced me. Take care of yourself from now on. He was so strong that the ring hit my face and instantly drew blood. But Ryan's words stabbed my heart even more painfully. In a corner where no one could see, Cherry gave me a complacent smile. She mouthed to me, "See, Nina, you are just garbage. No one likes you." Finally, under my mother's coercion, I sold the house. But the buyer was a scoundrel. In the end, because there were problems with the contract, I lost the house and didn't get any money. My mother was so angry that she beat me and told me to die outside. She also pointed at my nose and scolded, "You are so useless. You made such a good boyfriend run away in anger. What's the use of you? You might as well die outside." Looking at the things that had been thrown out, I finally breathed a sigh of relief. In the previous life, they used me to blackmail Ryan and borrowed 500 yuan from him. It was said to be borrowing, but in fact it was just taking. In the end, they didn't pay back a penny. As a result, as soon as Ryan's mother saw me, she said that I was greedy for her family's money. Even before I entered their family, she looked down on me. She forced Ryan to break up with me by threatening to kill herself. I was heartbroken and had a car accident while delivering takeout. So, in this life, I won't be so stupid. I deliberately called Ryan over and asked him to act out the previous scene with me. Now I am penniless. They made me lose my job. And without Ryan's support, they are afraid of being stuck with me and can't wait for me to die far away. This is just fine. I will have time to find out the truth. To find out the truth about Cherry's misdeeds. But I really underestimated their shamelessness. Because of the arrears in medical expenses, the hospital stopped my father's medicine and forced him to be discharged. Cherry cried and said that all the money was used to buy financial products and couldn't be withdrawn until the due date. Even all the property ownership certificates were mortgaged by her to buy financial products. My mother not only didn't blame her, but also comforted her. "Cherry, you mean well for this family. You're not wrong. Stop crying. Don't worry about the money. Mom will figure something out. Look, the favored one is never wrong." The solution Mom came up with was to come to me again and force me to sell my kidney to raise medical expenses for Dad. "I've already inquired about it. You're young and your kidney is in good condition. It can be sold at a high price. One kidney can be sold for 500 yuan, which is just enough for your dad's medical expenses." I was so shocked that I couldn't speak. I looked at my mom in astonishment. "Mom, that's a kidney. What's wrong with a kidney? A person has two. You won't die if you have one removed." She said it lightly. I took a deep breath. I had long been used to her indifference towards me. But when I heard her say such words, I still couldn't stop my tears from flowing. "Mom, don't you know what it means to be short of a kidney? When you forced my sister to give her kidney to Cherry back then, you also said it was okay. But later, her health deteriorated day by day. Her other kidney was ruined and she passed away. At that time, my sister was only 9 years old. She died." I was crying bitterly, pointing at Cherry and accusing my mom. "It's all because of her. Her arrival ruined my childhood and my sister's whole life." Slap. Maybe my words touched her sensitive nerve. My mom slapped me twice furiously. You're not allowed to say such things about Cherry. She didn't want to be sick either. Was it her fault that your sister died? How many times have I told you? It's my fault towards your uncle. If I hadn't introduced such a woman to him as his wife, he wouldn't have had your aunt gambling and fighting with others. And Cherry wouldn't have become an orphan. She's so pitiful. Can't you just let her be? Nina, how can you be so stingy? All of a sudden, my blood rushed to my head. I had heard these words countless times. When I was a child. She has no parents already. She's pitiful enough. Can't you just let her be? When I grew up. You're in a key university and have a good job. What's wrong with providing her with food and drink? Don't be so stingy. But at that time, I had just graduated and my salary was only 5,000 yuan. Yet I had to transfer 4,000 yuan to Cherry for her to spend. Even though she said in front of my mom, although the 4,000 yuan that sister gives me every month is not much, I still want to thank my sister. Then she hugged my mom's neck and kissed her on the face. Mom, for you and Dad to be able to live in a big villa soon. I've been working very hard at painting every day. I've lost a lot of weight. Mom looked at her lovingly and told her not to overwork herself. Cherry smiled sweetly. For Mom and Dad to be able to live in a big villa soon. It's all worth it no matter how hard Cherry works. Cherry is so sensible. Mom was extremely happy. Pinching Cherry's thin cheek. She turned around and told me to transfer another 500 yuan of nutrition expenses to Cherry every month. She didn't worry at all about how I could live on only 500 yuan. But at that time, Cherry was thin because she was on a diet. Mom. I wiped away my tears and took a deep breath. My sister and I were twins. For Cherry. You killed my sister. Now. You're coming to force me again. Are you only satisfied when I'm dead? Nina. What are you talking about? I'm asking you to save your dad. Don't push all the blame onto Cherry. You're just not filial. Selling one kidney can save your dad. Why don't you sell it? Yes. I'm unfilial. Not as filial as your precious daughter Cherry. Let her sell her kidney to save Dad. After shouting, I slammed the door shut. No matter how my mom knocked on the door outside, I didn't open it. Finally, my mom called the police, saying that I was unfilial and locked her outside. The police educated me for a while, and then let my mom stay in my shabby rented house. After giving me a few instructions, they left. After the police left, my mom looked at me triumphantly. Nina, you can't outwit me. I didn't think much and turned around to go to the bedroom and locked the door. In the middle of the night, I heard some rustling sounds and immediately jumped up alertly. Unexpectedly, 2 men broke into my room, held me down and tied me up. I raised my head and was startled when I saw their faces. These 2 men in front of me were none other than the chief surgeons in that hospital, where my mother donated my body in my previous life. At that time, I had a car accident and was sent to the hospital in a daze. My mom didn't send me to a public hospital at that time. Instead, at Cherry's instigation, she found an unknown private hospital. It was more like a black clinic, rather than a hospital. The medical environment was extremely bad. Even the operating table was makeshift. Once I entered there, I never woke up again. Later, my mom donated my body, saying that my organs could help more people. She was doing a good deed for me and helping me accumulate merit, hoping that I could be a good person in my next life. Recalling the scene in my previous life, I broke out in a cold sweat. One of the fatter men looked at me and asked the person behind him, "Is the girl who is going to sell her kidney you mentioned her?" My mom stepped forward and said with a smile, "Yes, she's my daughter. There will be no disputes for sure." The man's mouth curled into a disdainful arc. "You're so cruel that you're willing to sacrifice your own daughter." My mom gave a dry laugh. "I have no choice. The family is too poor. If it wasn't a last resort, I wouldn't have resorted to this." I looked at my mom with red-rimmed eyes and a pleading look, asking her to spare me. She sneered. Nina. Don't blame Mom. Saving your dad's life is your responsibility as a daughter. I sneered in my heart. Why did Cherry get all the benefits while I have to bear all the responsibilities alone? The men tied me up and sealed my mouth with tape. I looked at them in horror as the two men stuffed me into a sack. The surgical risk is very high. If she dies, we won't be responsible. Another man said to my mother. My mother said, as long as you give me the money, it doesn't matter whether she lives or dies. Her tone was so cold. She really didn't care about my life at all. I struggled hard, but it was all in vain. They were worried that my excessive movements would attract others' attention. So they gave me an injection. Immediately, I fainted, and my eyelids were too heavy to lift. I really wanted to sleep. It would be so nice to sleep and never wake up. Just as I was about to be carried out of the house, suddenly a group of policemen rushed in. 10 My mother and the 2 doctors were arrested. When my mother first found me, I had already sent a text message to Ryan, asking him to keep an eye on the surveillance in my house all the time. Once there was any abnormal movement, he should call the police. Ryan was originally going to put aside his work to accompany me, but in order to get the evidence of my mother persecuting me, I refused. He specially took a leave and carefully watched the surveillance on his phone until midnight. Because the evidence was conclusive, my mother and those 2 men were all sentenced. Cherry cried in the live stream room and questioned me why I was so cruel. I smiled and said, no matter how cruel I am, I'm not as cruel as you. So, I directly sent the evidence of Cherry's misdeeds that I had found during this period to her live stream room. Over the years, how she deceived my parents, bullied me, and coaxed my mother to sell my kidney. Also, she had already contacted her biological mother long ago. The 2 of them squandered the demolition compensation money wantonly. Cherry also laughed at my parents, saying that they were so stupid and easy to deceive. As long as she pretended to be pitiful, they would agree to anything. Even my father's car accident was not an accident. She hired someone to hit him and faked it as an accident. The reason was simple. She just couldn't bear to see me well. She wanted to force me to sell the house, ruin my reputation, make it impossible for me to find a job for the rest of my life, and be a beggar forever so that she could be happy. She said that she was annoyed just looking at my innocent and beautiful face. I had conclusive evidence, such as recordings, surveillance videos, and WeChat chats. Cherry's live stream room exploded immediately. Her angel-like persona collapsed instantly. Millions of people flooded into her live stream room to scold her and curse her. She immediately broke down and had to close the live stream and directly cancel her account and quit the internet. Some netizens also dug out her real-life information and directly went to her or to throw rotten eggs and poor feces. She experienced all that I had once experienced until the police came to her door and took her away. My mother also watched the news in prison. Naturally, she saw all of this and knew the truth. She called me and cried while apologizing to me. Nina, Mom is sorry for you. Mom didn't expect your cousin to be such a person. Mom was wrong. Can you forgive Mom? I didn't say a word. I could feel her excitement through the screen, but my heart was not touched at all. Then I heard her say again, Nina, I know you won't forgive Mom. It doesn't matter if you don't forgive me. But if it weren't for me, your uncle wouldn't have married the wrong person. After all, it was me who killed him. Your sister hates me and plots against me, which is understandable. Mom begs you, don't argue with her. Write a letter of understanding. Don't let her go to jail. If she goes to jail, her life will be ruined. Have pity on her. She has nothing now. My hand holding the phone was trembling. So, even so, was Cherry not wrong? Go to hell. You will die in prison. I shouted at the phone. Nina, you beast. I heard my mother scolding and roaring from the other side. 11 Ryan went to great lengths to find the person who set a trap to buy my house, and finally helped me get the house payment. He poked my forehead and said, You must have been so angry that you lost your head and signed the contract without reading it clearly. I shook my head and said, no. I read the contract clearly. But at that time, I really thought that I would rather give the house to someone else than let my mother and Cherry get it cheaply. Ryan held me in his arms lovingly and said, don't think about those bad people and bad things anymore. I will be good to you in the future. Always be good to you. I nodded and said, I want to travel to the Maldives. Ryan was slightly stunned when he heard this. And then he laughed and said, I'll book the tickets for this afternoon. Let's go there right now. We arrived in the Maldives that day and held a grand wedding in the Maldives. 1 month later, I came to the hospital. Because of the arrears of medical expenses, my father had been given up on treatment by the hospital and was now on his deathbed. Barely alive. I came to my father's bedside. Unfilial daughter. How dare you cut off my medical expenses? My father cursed at me again when he saw me. Dad. I've already repaid what I owed you in my previous life. I looked at my father and showed a faint smile. You'd better leave peacefully. As I spoke, I directly pulled out my father's oxygen tank. Evil daughter. My father opened his mouth wide to breathe in, and still cursed at me. But without the oxygen supply, he soon turned pale and lost his breath. In my father's heart, he had never regarded me as his daughter. If he had any feelings for me, he couldn't have given all the demolition compensation money to Cherry. He didn't even fight for it a little bit. If he had any feelings for me, he couldn't have sold his daughter's body and then gone to the Maldives to enjoy himself. In his heart, I was not even as good as cats and dogs. Many domestic cats and dogs can at least have their whole bodies intact when they die. But I would die without a whole body. So, I also donated my father's body to the hospital. And the hospital also gave me 500 yuan as compensation. 5 years later, my mother and Cherry were released from prison. Boom. A muck truck rushed over and knocked two people into the air. The two were admitted to the intensive care unit, and were on the verge of death. And I became the only family member of the two. The doctor asked me if their bodies could be donated after death. Ah, Nina. How dare you? Mom lying on the hospital bed roared angrily. I came to the bedside of my dying mother and smiled. Mom, you can't be so selfish. Donating shows great love in the world. I remembered that in my last life, when Mom donated my body, she also said the sentence, now I'm giving it back to Mom intact. Puff. Mom was so angry that she spat blood upwards and fell back on the bed. And her breathing gradually disappeared. Then I came to Cherry's bedside. Cherry had dozens of comminuted fractures on her body. And several steel bars were pierced through her heart and brain. She was bandaged like a mummy. Seeing me coming, Cherry struggled a little. Doctor. My sister's eyes are fine, and can be donated to those in need. Also, her lungs, spleen, liver and bone marrow can be donated. As for the heart, forget it. It's too dirty. I looked at the doctor and made the distribution with a smile. The attending doctor nodded with satisfaction. Cherry lying on the bed struggled violently. Her hand reached out to me, but she couldn't lift it at all. After a while, Cherry became motionless. Finally, the hospital gave me another 1 million yuan as compensation. And Cherry's inheritance naturally fell into my hands. I was her only relative. I took out all this inheritance, and the income from donating the bodies of my parents and Cherry to set up a psychological counseling institution. I hired psychological counseling teachers at a high salary. They are specially to enlighten those children like me. I hope they are strong, and that they won't be as miserable as I was in my last life. I hope they can change their fates. There are always storms in life. And He Rayam is their soul's haven. Let's encourage each other.